All right, let's dive in. Today we're tackling a question that's been around forever. Can faith and power really coexist?
That's a big one.
Yeah. And to get to the bottom of it, we're going way back to early Islam.
Okay, love it.
Our guide for this journey, Ali Shariati's. And once again, Abu Dharr.
A classic.
It's a deep dive into the life of Abu Dharr al-Ghifari, a man who, let's just say, didn't shy away from challenging authority.
Oh, he was definitely not afraid to make waves. What's fascinating about Abu Dharr is that he was there from almost the very beginning.
You mean like the start of Islam itself?
Right. He was one of the earliest converts, saw the whole thing grow from a small group, facing persecution into a massive empire.
Wow, talk about a front row seat to history.
Exactly. And what makes his story even more powerful is his total commitment to social and economic equality.
Like that was his driving force.
Absolutely. He saw those principles as the heart and soul of Islam. So we're not just talking about some historical figure here.
Right, it's not just dates and names.
No, Abu Dharr's story grapples with questions that are still so relevant today. It's like, what happens when those ideals of faith, bump up against the reality of power?
Yeah, that clash, that tension, you can feel it, even now.
To really get Abu Dharr, though, you have to picture the world he was living in.
Paint me a picture.
Arabia, back when Prophet Muhammad was first starting out. Stark contrasts everywhere,
But like what?
Well, you have these opulent courts, Persia, Rome. The emperors lived like gods.
Oh yeah, dripping in gold, all that.
Total extravagance. And then you have Prophet Muhammad choosing a life of utter simplicity, sharing meals with the poor, riding a donkey.
Talk about a powerful statement.
It was a direct challenge to the whole system, to everything people thought they knew about power and leadership, and it resonated.
Especially with those who are like yearning for something more.
A just society, exactly. And nobody embodied that message more fiercely than Abu Dharr.
So he wasn't just drawn to Islam's message, he was like ready to fight for it.
Yeah. I mean, he came from the Dhafar tribe, known for being independent, resistant to authority.
Oh, wow. So he had that rebellious streak already built in.
Totally. And you see that in how he encountered Islam in the first place. Shariati describes this incredible scene, right?
Lay it on me.
Abu Dharr's having all these doubts about the traditional idols, the ones everyone worshipped.
A crisis of faith.
Yeah, something like that. So in the middle of the night, he goes to Manat, the idol of his own tribe, strikes it with a stone, full of anger, full of doubt. Nothing. It just sits there.
Wow, that must have been a turning point.
It's like that moment shattered all his illusions about the existing power structures, He was ready for something new, something real. And Islam, with its emphasis on equality and justice, that was it. That was his path.
But he wasn't just a follower, was he?
Oh, no, not at all. He questioned, he challenged, always pushing to live out the truest spirit of the faith, which, of course, caused some friction as the Islamic Caliphate started expanding.
Ah, so things started to change.
Things always change.
Well, I mean, in those early days, under Abu Bakr and Umar, it seemed like they were sticking to the Prophet's simple lifestyle.
Yeah, there was a real sense of, we're all in this together. But then Uthman came along.
And the vibe shifted.
Definitely. You had all this wealth pouring in from conquests, right? And suddenly there's a gap growing between the rich and the poor. A whole new aristocracy pops up.
Not everyone was into sharing the wealth.
That's putting it mildly. And for Abu Dharr, this was a betrayal, pure and simple. Everything Islam stood for, tossed aside for gold and luxury.
So there it is, that tension between faith and power playing out in real time.
Right. It's like, okay, on one hand, you have these beautiful ideals, equality, justice, sharing wealth. And on the other, you have the pull of power, the temptation to grab all you can.
Last time we left off, Abu Dharr was exiled to Damascus. You'd think maybe he'd lay low for a bit.
You'd think, right. But that's not exactly Abu Dharr's style.
Oh, yeah, this is the guy who literally threw a rock at an idol.
Exactly. So there he is, in Damascus, the heart of Muawiyah's power. And he's not holding back.
Oh, no.
Nope. He keeps calling out Muawiyah's lavish lifestyle, seeing it all, the gold, the palaces, as a complete contradiction of Islamic principles.
Bold move.
He even goes so far as to confront Muawiyah about the Green Palace, this incredibly opulent building.
This is getting good.
Abu Dharr basically asks him straight up, did you build this with your own money or the people's money?
Whoa, deep question.
If it was the latter, Abu Dharr argued, it was straight up treason. Using public funds for personal luxury, that's a big no-no in any era.
So he's still stirring the pot, even in exile. I mean,
Yeah.
what was he hoping to achieve? Was he trying to change the system, or was it more about staying true to his beliefs, even if it meant constant conflict?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Was he a pragmatist aiming for reform? Or an idealist willing to sacrifice everything for what he believed in?
Maybe a little of both.
Probably. But whatever his motivation, his actions definitely made him a major thorn in Muawiyah's side.
Yeah, I can imagine. So what happened? Did Muawiyah just ignore him?
Not exactly. He ends up appealing to Caliph Uthman to get Abu Dharr out of Damascus.
So he kind of passes the buck.
Yeah, effectively. And Abu Dharr is forced back to Medina.
Back to where it all began. Was he welcomed with open arms?
Oh, that's rich. Not quite the hero's return.
I guess things had changed there, too.
Oh, yeah. While Abu Dharr was away, the problems he was so worried about, the wealth gap, the lavish lifestyles, they only gotten worse.
Uh-oh. That's not good.
And Shariati mentions this particularly tense encounter between Abu Dharr and Uthman after Abd al-Rahman dies.
Remind me, who was he again?
Abd al-Rahman was one of the Prophet's companions, and he was incredibly wealthy.
Okay.
And when he died, he left behind a massive fortune, like mountains of gold and land.
Okay, so
Well, Uthman, seeing this massive display of wealth, he says, Abd al-Rahman is blessed by God that he lived well, and when he died, he left behind all of this wealth.
whoa, strong statement.
Right. And for Abu Dharr, this was just blasphemy, equating material wealth with God's blessing. Totally twisted everything he believed in.
Yeah, it wasn't just about the money. It was about what that wealth represented.
Exactly. For Abu Dharr, true piety was using your wealth to help those in need, not hoarding it for yourself.
Sharing, not just accumulating.
Right. He saw this whole focus on personal gain as a total corruption of the Prophet's message.
It's like they were sliding back into the same systems of oppression that Islam was meant to dismantle. So what did Abu Dharr do? Just sit there quietly fuming?
Are you kidding? This is Abu Dharr we're talking about.
Fair point. What did he do?
Well, Shariati describes this amazing scene, right? Abu Dharr marches into Uthman's house holding this camel bone in his hand.
Wait, a camel bone? Why a camel bone?
It's like this visceral symbol of like the bare essentials, the harshness of poverty.
Wow, I get it.
He goes right up to Uthman and starts reciting verses from the Quran, the ones about the dangers of hoarding wealth, talking about how true piety lies in sharing, caring for those less fortunate.
Laying down the law, Quran style.
Exactly. It's this incredibly dramatic confrontation, the poor, outspoken critic versus the wealthy, powerful caliph.
Talk about a David and Goliath moment.
It gets even more intense. Abu Dharr actually physically attacks Ka'b al-Barr, this Jewish scholar who had converted to Islam and was advising Uthman.
Whoa, hold up. Violence? That seems pretty out of character for Abu Dharr.
It is a bit jarring, isn't it? I mean, this is a guy who preached peace and justice.
Exactly. So what's going on here?
It's complicated. Some people see this incident as a sign of Abu Dharr's flaws, like maybe he had a bit of a temper. Others argue it was a desperate act, driven by frustration with those who were twisting the message of Islam for their own benefit.
Like he just snapped?
Maybe. But either way, it adds this whole other layer to his story, He wasn't this perfect hero. He was a human being, struggling with complex issues, sometimes making mistakes.
Definitely makes him more relatable, more human.
And this incident, along with his constant criticism of Uthman, well, it seals his fate. Uthman decides to exile him again, this time to Rabada, this desolate area on the outskirts of Medina. Even Ali, who supported Abu Dharr, couldn't stop it.
So once again, he's silenced, pushed to the margins for speaking truth to power. It's a familiar story, even today.
It is, sadly. But even in that moment of isolation, there's a glimmer of hope.
Tell me more.
Shariati describes this really poignant scene where Ali, even though he couldn't prevent the exile, decides to accompany Abu Dharr to the edge of Rabada.
A gesture of solidarity.
Exactly. And he brings his sons, Hassan and Hussein.
Wow, so it's like, even though the Caliph wanted Abu Dharr silenced, his message was still resonating with some of the most prominent figures in the community.
Exactly. Even though he was physically isolated, his ideas weren't. And his life in Rabada, despite the hardship, becomes a powerful testament to his convictions.
So we see that pattern again. The more they try to silence him, the more his message seems to spread.
His simple life in exile becomes this stark contrast to the extravagance and hypocrisy he was railing against.
It's like he's embodying the change he wants to see.
And this exile wasn't just a personal hardship for Abu Dharr. It had devastating consequences for his family.
What do you mean?
Well, Shariati mentions that while they were living in Rabada, Abu Dharr's daughter and son both died. His son couldn't withstand the harsh conditions, died of hunger.
Oh my God, that's awful.
It's a heartbreaking reminder of the human cost of standing up for what you believe in.
He sacrificed everything for his principles, even the well-being of his own children. Makes you think about how far we're willing to go for our own beliefs.
Right. It's a tough question. Where do we draw the line between personal integrity and the welfare of those we love? But even in the face of such immense tragedy, Abu Dharr's spirit didn't break. He kept receiving visitors, sharing his knowledge of the Quran, the Prophet's teachings. His tent became this gathering place for people seeking guidance, inspiration.
It's like he created this little community, a haven built on justice and equality, even in the midst of exile.
And that's the amazing thing about his story. Even when we feel isolated, our actions, our choices, they can ripple outwards, inspiring others to create change.
So from challenging the Caliph to surviving exile and unimaginable loss, Abu Dharr's life was quite a journey. It makes you wonder what kind of legacy he left behind after enduring all of that.
That's a great question, and it's actually what we'll be exploring in the final part of our deep dive. We'll look at the end of Abu Dharr's life and the lasting impact of his message on the world.
We've traveled quite a journey with Abu Dharr, haven't we? From the center of the early Islamic Empire to the desolate outskirts of Medina.
Yeah, it's been a wild ride, seeing him challenge caliphs, face exile, and deal with those unimaginable personal tragedies.
But his commitment to his beliefs, it never wavered, not for a second. It's pretty inspiring, actually.
It really is. His story shows that true strength isn't about having power. It's about sticking to your principles even when everything's falling apart around you.
Last time, we left Abu Dharr in Rabada, weakened by age and all that hardship, still grieving the loss of his children. It's tough to imagine finding any hope in that situation.
It is, but Shariati paints this picture of Abu Dharr's final days with a kind of quiet dignity.
Oh, how so?
Well, one day, he's feeling especially weak, and he asks his wife, Zarr, to help him find something to eat.
They were literally scavenging for food.
They were desperate, yeah. Looking for any kind of vegetation, hoping to find something, anything to satisfy their hunger.
It's hard to believe that they went from being respected figures in the early Muslim community to, searching for scraps in the wilderness.
It really highlights the sacrifices they made for their beliefs. But their search, it came up empty, and when they got back to their tent, Abu Dharr collapsed. He knew his time was up.
Oh, wow.
He told Zarr to leave his body by the roadside and find some passing travelers to help bury him.
Even in his final moments, he was thinking of others, trying to make things easier for his wife.
Exactly. His compassion was there until the very end. So, Zarr, heartbroken but determined, she did as he asked, climbed a nearby hill and just kept looking for any sign of life.
It must have felt like forever.
It probably did. But eventually, she saw 3 riders coming towards her. She signaled to them for help.
Knowing Abu Dharr's history, I can't help but wonder how they reacted when they realized who he was.
Shariati tells us they were overwhelmed with grief, but also awe. One of them, a young man from the Ansar, offered his own cloak to wrap Abu Dharr's body.
The Ansar, those are the people of Medina who welcomed the Prophet and his followers when they had to flee Mecca, right?
Exactly. They provided shelter and support when the early Muslims were at their most vulnerable.
So for one of them to be there at Abu Dharr's death, it says a lot.
It does. Even though he'd been exiled and was seen as controversial, he still had a lot of respect within the community.
Even those who didn't agree with everything he did still recognized, the purity of his intentions.
I think that's right.
So what happened then?
Well, as he lay dying, Abu Dharr asked about the backgrounds of those around him. He wanted to make sure that no one associated with the government or the military was there.
He was rejecting those systems to the very end.
It was his final act of defiance. And with his mind at ease, he passed away, his journey finally over.
Alone, just as the Prophet predicted.
He did say, he walks alone, dies alone, and will be resurrected alone. But Shariati makes it clear that this physical solitude isn't the whole story.
Because his message lived on. Right?
Exactly. His story, his commitment to justice and equality, it's continued to inspire people for centuries, both Muslims and non-Muslims.
He became a symbol of resistance, a reminder that true faith isn't just about words, it's about action.
And speaking truth to power, even when it's hard, even when it's dangerous. So what can we learn from Abu Dharr today? We live in a completely different world, facing different problems. Does his story still have something to teach us?
I think it does. I think it speaks to a fundamental part of being human.
That struggle to balance faith and power. Exactly. And our yearning for a just and equitable world.
He reminds us that true piety isn't about blindly following the rules or going along with whatever's happening. It's about standing up against injustice, speaking up for those who are being marginalized, using our voices to make things better.
And his life shows us that we all have a part to play in creating a more just and equitable society, whether it's speaking out against discrimination, advocating for fair economic policies, or simply treating each other with dignity and respect. Our actions, no matter how small they might seem, they can make a difference.
Even if we feel like we're alone.
Especially then. Abu Dharr's story is a reminder that one person with unwavering conviction can spark change that reaches far beyond their own life. So as we wrap up our deep dive into the life of Abu Dharr, I want to leave you with this question. Abu Dharr died alone, physically isolated, but his message continues to echo through the centuries. What is it about his story that still resonates with us today? And what lessons can we take from his life and apply to our own world?